Hey guys, my name is Ben Dickman, wildlife biologist with Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'm the area manager for Whetstone Creek Conservation Area, where I wish you all could be today, but with the times, we'll roll with it virtually. A little bit about the area. Whetstone Creek Conservation Area is primarily a upland habitat types of both dry mesic woodlands, a bunch of old field habitat, grasslands, and a little bit of prairie conversions going on, as well as about 600 acres of cropland that we kind of use to help manipulate the open lands and manage for some of our key species that we're looking to manage for. Like I said, we're 5,200 acres. We're in the northern portion of Callaway County, located out by Williamsburg. And where we sit on the landscape, Whetstone's kind of a border between the northern plains of Missouri that would have been prehistorically or pre-settlement prairie habitat, and then we sit right on the border of that, and then where like the Ozark woodlands and stuff start. So we're kind of in a unique area where we have some prairie, savanna, woodland habitat, as well as some forested habitat on our varying slopes here. So to start off today, I'm probably going to walk through kind of different successional stages of some of our woodlands. We'll cover some of our open land management as well. Where we stand today, it's a restored woodland that we've been working on. This was back in 2016 commercially harvested, meaning we had a timber sale. A logger come in, they bid on the sale of it, and then they harvest the timber. And basically what the forester did here, we took it down to a 30 basal area, which basal area is meaning the amount of area the diameter of a tree at breast height covers in a 1 acre area, and represented in like square feet. So when you look out here, this is actually about a 30 basal area, meaning that 30 square foot of the 100 acres is represented by trees. Kind of, if you were looking from an aerial view, cut at breast height, how much of that area is actually covered by the trunk of a tree. So this is pretty thin. This would be representing an open woodland, and we'll kind of go through some of them today. The open canopy woodlands, the more closed canopy woodland. We'll probably look at some forested stuff that's more basically your trees. There's no open canopy, so it's shading out the forest floor. And then, like I said, this is considered an open woodland, meaning I guess we'll go through kind of the different habitat types first. Like a prairie has 0% canopy cover. You get into savannas that have a little bit higher canopy cover, up to like 30%, just meaning that if you're standing in it and you look up, the amount of sky taken up by canopy would be your canopy opening. So here we're probably in between 30. We're not quite a savanna. There's a few too many trees. So we're more at a 30 to 50% range. Once you get 50 and higher, you're into a closed canopy system or a forested system. So here, our primary goal was to create an open woodland that would be suitable for use by bobwhite quail, which is one of our main focal species that we manage here. Whetstone Creek is considered a quail restoration landscape. It used to be a quail emphasis area, but they're taking on more of a landscape approach to things, meaning that like between here, Prairie Fork that you learned about last week, or time being, and then up north of here, kind of on the border of what would have been prehistoric prairie, is a larger landscape, meaning that the habitat's there with management to better represent what's needed by bobwhite quail. So that's our main focus here. And if you look out through this woodland, I mean, you can see all these forbs. This would be tickseed, coreopsis. There's what most people would call beggar lice, the things that stick to you. I mean, this is great quail food here. They really enjoy these seeds, as well as great deer browse, which would be another one of our other main focal species. So I mean, this is offering great browse, offering great cover for quail, offering great brood habitat, which meaning just kind of the habitat that's needed during the summer months to raise a brood of quail, because their primary diet's made up of insects throughout the summer. So the more diversity, which would be probably the key term that someone would probably use in regard to wildlife management, the more diversity you have, and this being in a woodland between a hard mast and then forbs and native grasses, it's going to attract more insects. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it or not, but you can kind of hear a buzzing of bees and other insects. So that's going to really support birds throughout the summer. That's their main high nutrient value to grow and get ready for winter. So that was one of our main focuses here, is to get quail using it. And we actually do, in the month of October, we do fall whistle counts, where we go out in the morning. We have 18 posts on the area where we stand there, and in the morning they do a covey call. It's not your normal Bob White call that you typically are used to hearing, but it's more of a covey call in the morning, and each covey will go off, and you stand there and count. You know, you might have 4, 5, 7, and usually they're all going at the same time, so it's pretty tough. But with them counts, before these woodlands were thinned, you know, you'd struggle to hear any coveys in here. And now one of our points just located over here, we're actually hearing quail down in using the woodland. So that's interesting to see. You know, we're only 4 years into a woodland restoration here, and we're noticing, you know, species that we're targeting starting to use it. So that's pretty interesting. Shows off, you know, what we're trying to do is working. And then I mentioned white-tailed deer would be another species that we're managing for. These woodlands are great for that. You come in here during the winter, or even now, there's a pretty good breeze today. Deer will be laying up in here, great bedding habitat, and then you get a breeze blowing through on a hot summer day. It's great for deer to bed. And another thing we're kind of looking for when you thin the woodlands like this, when you open up that canopy, all that sunlight that would have been blocked by the overhead tree species before is now reaching the soil and allowing for this flush of forbs and grasses. So that really puts all the habitat at a, you know, if we're managing for quail that are that tall, turkey that are that tall, or deer that are this tall, all that habitat's really put right on the ground where they're needing it. If you have an open forest floor, you know, you have a mid-story that's, you know, good for some birds. But really what we're focusing on is those species that need that habitat on the ground level. And obviously look through here, if we walk through there, there'd be, you know, it'd be at our waist or higher. There'd be some shrubby blackberry right here, which is great deer to browse, high in protein content. And then the, like I talked about earlier, the beggar's lice, great high protein content, rivals soybeans actually, which is one of their favorite browses. You probably see them in bean fields all the time. So we're offering, you know, a buffet of forbs and grasses for cover. I saw a couple grasses here. Here is like a bottle brush grass. It's pretty indicative of a woodland. It's called bottle brush grass because it's like a brush you'd use to clean like a baby bottle. There's some Indian grass over there, but the more you open the canopy, the more grasses you'll get in there. Like a savanna that I said was a lower percentage of canopy opening. You'll have a ground floor that's kind of controlled by grasses, whether it's big blue stem, little blue stem, some Indian grass, and then, you know, some various other cool season or warm season grasses. When you increase your canopy cover, you'll get more forbs and shrubs. There's not too much shrubby stuff growing in here. We actually burnt this of April of this year, so it could kind of be considered a growing season burn. And I would assume, did Jeff cover kind of types of burns and timing for prairie fork?
We talked a lot about the importance of burning, not as much the timing.
Okay. So there's two main timings of burns. It'd be like a growing season burn, which could be like right now and kind of the tail end of summer. Usually like July 15th to September 15th could be considered a growing season burn. And in your grasslands, you're burning during the summer, kind of to reduce warm season grasses and then promote the growth of forbs, your flowering species. And when you're doing that, when you burn off that grass, that it would just be getting ready to kind of start to seed or go to seed, and then start storing up nutrients in the roots to overwinter. When you burn off a grass species during the summer, what you're doing is you're taking off what's above ground, and now they need to put their stored energy into growing again, right at the tail end of summer when they should be storing energy in the roots to overwinter. So by doing that, you're really increasing your odds of killing that, a winter kill on that, or at least knocking it back to where something in the spring can outproduce the grass, because when it should have been storing energy, it was putting it into new growth. And the same could be said for like a woodland burn. Something like this is open enough that it would burn during the summer. Anywhere it's shaded like this, which would kind of be below, it's noon right now, so the sun's about straight above us, but you can see shadows underneath about every tree. If this was closed canopy, that shade your humidity level would be higher, so you wouldn't get a good burn. The moisture levels wouldn't be low, so it wouldn't burn real good. But in woodlands like this, we could actually come in here and probably burn this during the summer, and it would favor the forbs, knock back the grasses, and then some of the woody resprout, like the blackberry I showed you. There's some younger oak saplings. I saw some wafer ash growing on the edge up here. Some of the species that, if given the chance, they would eventually shade out these forbs and other components because they'd outcompete it. So burning during the summer also really inhibits the growth of woody plants. So you'd have a better chance. I'll use the term, like if you burn a dormant season, you're most likely going to top kill a species, meaning that you kill what's above ground, because when you burn, you're like boiling the sap and that cambium layer to where the tree or sapling or whatever can't get the energy stored in the roots up into the plant. So it really inhibits their growth, obviously. So your best bet in the summer, when the sap's flowing, you're boiling at the sap, damaging the tree a lot more. You have a better chance of actually totally killing it rather than top killing it. So like some of these, and it pertains more to your species that aren't fire tolerant. Your oak species, your hickories, and some others, they've got a real corky bark, and that's what helps them, make it through a fire. They're established through a fire community of prehistoric times. Like I was saying earlier, kind of where we're situated here, when either a lightning fire or a Indian lit fire would drive across the plains of northern Missouri, where we're situated here, that helped create these woodlands and savannas, to where we're kind of, like I said, on that Ozark border where there would have been, a big heavy timber presence. Those big sweeping fires would crash into the woodlands here, kind of thinning up that edge. That would create a savanna, because that's where your hottest, head fires are going to hit. And that would really kill out a lot of the fire intolerant tree species, like dogwood, serviceberry, hackberry, stuff with thinner bark, to where it's not getting that protection from the fire and it's hitting the cambium layers and damaging the tree. And then once you move on from your savannas, the fire would get kind of, I guess, less, what's the word I'm looking for?
Intense?
Yeah, less intense. And then you would get, more tree survival. So you're kind of stepping through that stage of succession, where there'd be more trees, bigger trees. Because the bigger the tree, the harder it is to kill by fire. Once you kind of get above a 5-inch diameter, it's harder to kill, where you'd have to go in and kind of mechanically treat it with like a chainsaw or chemical to thin it, rather than thinning it by fire. Like these saplings out here, these oak saplings, they'd at least be top killed. And just the way oaks evolved around fire, they're pretty rigorous, in which they get burned off and they'll stump sprout. So when you top kill it, the roots are still alive, and they'll kind of outcompete other intolerant species, because they can quickly resprout, grow up taller, and shade out the other species that would be seeding back.
And I noticed the fact that these are all oaks is probably not an accident.
No, these are all oaks. and it's kind of by selection. There probably would have been a lot of hickory in here, locust. I see some walnut down here. Once you get kind of to the west of us here, it drops down to drainage, and our basal area increases because you're getting more moisture, shade, better soils, better growing conditions for trees than you would up here on our ridge tops. So up here is oaks predominantly. You know, your soil type can kind of make up the types of oaks you're going to have. The better the soil, the deeper, richer soils are going to be larger white oaks. We kind of have a drier, poorer soil around here, so we have a lot of post oak, black oak species. And when they came in and harvested this, they targeted actually the black oak species. They don't live as long as the white oaks, so a lot of the black oaks were reaching that maturity stage where they'd start dying. So in order to get some value out of them, financial wise, they harvested the black oak species, leaving a lot of the older white oaks. And with a lot of these trees, I mean, you could tell it's been kind of crowded in before. The more crowded canopy you have, the straighter a tree is going to grow, trying to reach up into sunlight. If you see this one here, you can see its canopy when it was probably surrounded. That would have been, you know, its spreading growth. And you look down the tree, and now you have some limbs that were probably previously shaded out, and now that they're getting sunlight, they'll start branching out and becoming more of an open, wide-crowned tree. And those wide-crowned trees are indicative of the savannas and the open woodlands, just because they've got plenty of sunlight and they're growing out in search of sunlight instead of up fighting for sunlight. So there's some areas on here that, you know, are kind of grown up now, either from like a lack of fire or lack of thinning. But if you walk into the woodlands, you'll see these big sprawling, they call them like old wolf trees, just meaning that was the old dominant oak 150 years ago that's still alive. So when you see something like that, you can assume that the canopy used to be a lot more open. So there's a couple spots here that we'd go in and we thin around those trees or thin around that edge, just knowing that, you know, before the area was purchased in 1976 and was heavily grazed and stuff before that, but up until that point, you know, before settlement, that was probably an old savanna that was dominated by grasses, burned pretty regularly, and the only trees surviving were these very large white oak wolf trees.
So just to compare with other areas we'll visit, this spot was harvested selectively 5 years ago, did you say?
Yeah, 2016.
2016, and it was just burnt this last April. So this is what it looks like.
Yep, and our plan is with this, kind of with any wildlife management strategy, you always want to have an objective. And I said, like, our objective earlier was quail management for the most part, as well as, you know, our main focus in this district with Prairie Fork, Whetstone, and another area we have Danville, is more natural community management, trying to get it back to the state it was before settlement, meaning that we're using prescribed fire as our #1 tool to get in here and manage these woodlands like it would have been before people were on the landscape, stopping the fire from spreading through the natural communities. So that's kind of our #1 goal, and our objective is to keep it like this. If we would just walk away from this, the oaks, you know, I don't know if you guys have really been introduced to the stages of succession, to where as time goes on, different species outcompete one another, and you eventually go from like an old field if it was left alone. You'll get locust species, other kind of invasives. Eventually the oaks and other more, you know, native species would be outcompeted, and you eventually get to mature like forest if left alone long enough. So if we walked away from this, the saplings would start taking over, and we'll actually for sure look at a spot that we'll be burning this coming spring. And just kind of what I'm saying now is the saplings are taking over, and we see a reason why to burn it. This here, since we're still in the restoration phase, seeing that it was started in 2016, we'll probably burn it every 2 to 3 years. And then once you kind of get your forb grass establishment kind of up and going and out, you know, shading out the ground, out competing some stuff, we'll back off to more of a 5 to 8 year fire regime through here. But since we're still early, we burnt it. It was burnt the year it was harvested as well, 2016. And then we burnt it again spring of this year, so 2020. So unfortunately, I think we had planned to do it last year, but with weather and other priorities, we didn't get it burned. So this year we burned it again. I'm looking to probably burn it a growing season burn during the summer, because this is one of the areas that is open enough. I would like to growing season burn it to really take out the saplings. They get even more kind of downward. There's better soil and more moisture. So I'm really hoping to knock back the saplings and keep it this big heavy grass and forb component for quail, deer bedding, turkey nesting. So that's our main objective here, and we'll continue to use fire in order to carry that out. We have, since we burnt this winter, we came through here, we did do some invasive species management. Our number one competitor in here would be autumn olive. We do have some bush honeysuckle as well. And we'd come through here. We'd actually put on backpack sprayers, and we started up here to the north. I think it's about a 600-acre unit, all the way down to the creek. For this, there's mostly two of us. We come through, and in the winter, none of this was grown up, so you could see pretty good. We come in with a chemical called Garlon 4, mixed with either diesel fuel or a basil bark oil, and create a solution. And we'd go through and we basil bark it, meaning about 12 foot up, or 12 inches up from the ground. You use that chemical and you kind of ring the base of the sprout or the tree, the shrub, whatever you're trying to kill, and it effectively kills it. So we went through all this by hand, kind of gridded it out just to stay on top of it, but hopefully with continue burning as well, we'll at least top kill it and allowing the native vegetation to hopefully outcompete it. So that's kind of it for this area. We'll go through some other areas on the area and just kind of show different stages and our goals and what we're looking forward to do in the future. All right, driving to our next spot, we wanted to stop and show you kind of the enemy we were talking about. This would be the autumn olive shrub, and unfortunately it's a heavy reproducer and heavy spreader. We battle it. It gets a red berry on it that the birds really enjoy. So there's just about anywhere they can land and take a poop. There'll probably be an autumn olive growing there in the future. And like I said, we'll come in here and basil bark it during the winter when there's not all the brush growing around it. We'll come up and line about that tall, and that chemical will be transported down into the roots and effectively kill the tree.
So do you break the bark and then spray the chemical?
Nope, you just spray it right over top, and add in that diesel fuel or that basil bark in it. It really helps it stick and then actually penetrate the bark of the tree, or shrub in this case, and get it into the transport layers of the tree down to the roots, up to the shoots, and effectively kill it. Over here you can see some of the old skeletons. They're like that because we burnt it this spring. If we were to walk over there, which we won't because it's pretty thick between us and it, if you were to take back a lot of this growth here, you would see it starting to form new shoots. Like I said, it was just top killed. It's really not too damaged by fire. It'll get back up and outcompete everything else around it. But if we run enough fire through it, it'll at least keep it suppressed to where some stuff can outcompete it. Like that one's kind of being taken over by a blackberry shrub. So that'll kind of help shade out those shoots and hopefully have some effect on it. All right, speaking on fire, and you guys are probably sick of hearing it already since that's what we've covered, but it's our number one management tool, the most effective and the cheapest form. This is actually one of our growing season summer burns. We're kind of here in a grassland unit. You can see, laying on the ground here, here's some little blue stem that burnt up. And obviously there's a bunch of oak trees behind us. And like I said, this time of year is our best bet of actually killing them rather than top killing them. These ones here, these smaller sprouts, they were probably completely killed, along with over there, but some of them you see are still green. I got shingle oak there. Those will probably sprout back after this growing season. But we still damaged it. That's kind of an area they're growing in pretty thick. It's good kind of shrubby escape cover for quail, but if you get too much of a mature tree standpoint, you're kind of getting away from quail habitat because there's avian predators and raccoons utilize trees as well to cross the landscape. So the further away from mature trees, the better off quail have for survival. And also kind of a reason we really like these growing season summer burns in these grassland units. I said earlier, kind of diversity is the key to wildlife management. And if we look over here, you see a portion that remained unburned because it didn't have fuel in it. It's not, you can see in there's a few clumps of big blue stem warm season grass. But compared to these areas and right there behind it, it did not get any fire. So we're kind of creating a mosaic out here on the landscape. There's some remaining cover here that'll last through the winter. And then next year that'll kind of be a little more mature, a little further along, while the rest of this is fresh new growth. It'll be kind of more of a, at least this next growing season, it'll be more 4B than it was kind of becoming a monoculture of warm season grasses. So just another tool that we utilize during the summer, and you know, if conditions are right, it's great. We had a pretty dry summer, so it led to some pretty good burning conditions that should have took care of some mature trees out here. All right, so this stop on the tour, we're actually in Whetstone Creek itself, the area, or the creek that the area gets its name from. And here we're going to talk about riparian habitat. Whetstone Creek, actually the riparian corridor of it, is considered a natural area with the state. And it's actually considered that because we have the black-nosed shiner in here, which is an endangered species. So kind of our management for this part of the area is kind of non-management. We let the species, like over here there's a bunch of willow, sycamores, the species that, some maples, the species that really, you know, will be found in a riparian corridor, just because they like wet feet. This is where, you know, all the water drains, and I guess the Whetstone Creek kind of watershed. And these trees, like I said, we don't do much management. They do get included in our burns, just because this is about as best of a burn line as you can get. But lots of times these bottoms don't even burn because they'll stay kind of wet through the winter. They'll kind of stay shaded throughout the rest of the period of the year. So we kind of just let the trees grow up along here to stabilize the stream banks. I mean, you can see them right here. It would have been eroded without it. We're kind of surrounded by monoculture agriculture that quickly drains off into here. So we utilize the trees to stabilize the creek banks, and as well as the trees. I mean, there's plenty of roots down here. So in the watershed draining into here, filtering the different chemicals or particulates in the water flowing through the soil. So kind of what we do along the creek itself is kind of leave it be and leave it natural. We do come through here. We'll try to treat the invasives we find. But other than that, it's, you know, we have 2 of these creek crossings that we try to use minimally. We try not to push the sediment into the creek whenever it floods and these crossings fill up. So it's kind of just to reduce our impact in these areas. All right, here we are in one of our timber units. And this has actually been TSI'd through a contractor, meaning timber stand improvement, or from kind of the wildlife manager side of it. Being more worried about the habitat, we call it more of a woodland thinning than anything. And what's been done here, if you kind of moves the camera around, you can see the canopy. Well, looking down first, obviously there's more trees in here, so a higher basal area than what we had at that first spot that was 30. This is somewhere between like 60 and 80. So this would be considered more of a closed canopy woodland. Obviously there's probably, it's probably upwards of 70–80% canopy. But there's still some light getting down to the ground floor. Before this was thinned or TSI'd, there was a lot of cedar standing in here, and other, I guess, weed trees, if you want to call them that. It'd be like hackberry, elm, obviously the cedar. There's a big cedar skeleton right here in front of us. Those trees are either knocked to the ground by a chainsaw, or like this one here has been girdled, meaning that the contractor took a chainsaw and just stuck the end of his bar in, circled the tree, cutting off that layer that's transporting the nutrients for the tree, ultimately killing it. Probably put some Tordon chemical in there as well, just to get it into the roots, and that really keeps it from stump sprouting back. Like I mentioned earlier, anytime it's top killed, it'll most likely sprout from the stump. And the larger trees in here, they usually tend to girdle. That way we're not having a lot of dead down fuels on the ground, because the first time this will be burned. This was completed 2 years ago, hasn't been burned yet. We would have liked to burn it by now, but just with some logging and other stuff going on, we didn't get it done. So hopefully this winter we'll get this burned. It'll consume a bunch of this fuel that's laying on the ground. It'll be more of an intense fire the first couple times, burning up that fuel. So it'll kill some of the saplings. Here you can actually see this looks like it was an elm. And lots of times we'll actually leave some elms untreated, stump treated wise, so they sprout back. If you look close on here, if you can get with the camera, you'll actually see where deer browse on it. All these tips are right off. With this TSI, those stump sprouts on what you don't treat, with what you don't treat will sprout back, and deer really key in on that over winter when a lot of the other native browse is gone. They'll browse on them woody sprouts, the very tips, the buds. Highly nutritious, gets them through the winter. They favor some species more than others. Obviously elm's a real good one that we'll actually leave untreated. So that's another benefit of it. And then like I said, we thinned it down. It's not as open as the other one, so obviously if you look through, you're not seeing all the wildflowers and grasses that we saw before. It'll stay more shrubby. There's more kind of forbs that aren't real showy, but they wouldn't be here without that sunlight hitting the floor. So we removed kind of the middle canopy of the cedars and the other unwanted trees to allow that growth. And then by burning it here soon, we'll kind of knock it back, probably top kill a lot of it, and re-sprout. Still providing cover and browse all through it, providing for oak regeneration. A lot of these trees weren't oaks, and oaks are selected. It's primarily in Missouri kind of the more of financial interest. Obviously for lumber, they make a lot of whiskey barrels in Missouri out of them. So if you're a landowner, you know you're targeting to grow the best, biggest oaks you can to get money for them. Oaks are also great for wildlife because they're a hard mass-producing tree. And by thinning this, we'll actually create more acorns by cutting down some of the trees that were producing acorns or killing them, like this oak here. By less competition, more sunlight, more water availability, the trees that are here will start producing more acorns, which would be more food for the wildlife. And then lots of times what trees kind of get selected, like this tree here that was girdled, the oak tree, but you can see there it's got a fork on it pretty early. That was kind of selected just because there wouldn't be much board feet in that tree. They're really harvesting kind of from the first fork down. So that's given us, taking a tree that didn't have much value, getting it out of here to allow for trees that would have some value to be more prolific in here. And then if we look over here, hopefully it shows up on the video. If we look over here to our west, kind of the dividing line would be these big trees here. Over there wasn't thinned or had the TSI applied to it. So it's a lot thicker, not as much sunlight reaching the floor. You're not going to see a lot of this sumac, oak species over there, just because it's being shaded out on the ground level. So kind of again a variance here, a little diversity. Once you get over there, it's kind of more of a forested aspect, just because of the slope, which way it's directed. Which I don't know if I covered. Your forests are mostly east, your east and north facing slopes, just because they get less sunlight, they get more water. We talked about the soils being deeper and richer. And then your woodlands or your glades, your savannas, they're mostly on kind of south and west facing aspects. They're hotter, drier, less water, poor soils. So you get less trees growing there. The trees that are growing there don't get as big, and you kind of get different species based upon that soil type as well. And kind of something as a manager that you can look at, say, this place was purchased in 1976, and there's been managers before me. But when you're kind of new, either it's maybe you own your own property or we inherit kind of a new conservation area, there's actually a program called Web Soil Survey that we use, and it's actually a large soil survey, and you can look at maps, and it'll, based on the soil types there, it'll actually help show what prehistorically or pre-settlement the habitat type would have been. So that's something as an area manager we kind of utilize too. There's portions of the area that now might be, are closed canopy woodland, but if you're looking on that, it shows it was actually like more of a savanna type soil. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. It's up here towards the edge. There's some large oak trees in it. So that's something, as a manager you can look back on and kind of make objectives and decisions on in the future as far as natural community restoration or management. I think from here we'll probably go look at one of our savanna restorations. I'll show you kind of an example of those large wolf trees on them savanna edges that I was talking about.
Cool. And we'll go by a food plot, a fresh food plot. And this has nothing to do with the rest of the trip, but I totally found a fossil. I think it's a brachiobrod.
All right, here we are in that food plot that he was talking about. It doesn't look like much right now. Unfortunately, we haven't had much rain up until this week. But these are kind of another, we don't do too much of it. You kind of hate to come in here and mow down, disc up what habitat would be there for wildlife. So we're this is actually kind of more of an experimental thing to keep it kind of a no-till system and having something on the ground throughout the year. Our primary focus for the food plot be white-tailed deer. Whetstone's also a level 3 deer emphasis area. That's just meaning that we kind of set our own regulations based upon we conduct deer spotlight surveys. We actually just did that in August. And when we do that, we have a 10-mile loop that goes through the area. It's kind of varied depending on the habitat type. We try to represent it all, our woodlands, our riparian corridors, cropland, which is where all the deer are, and kind of skew your data. And then some of our grassland units and stuff up here that will be by at the savanna restoration area. But we planted the food plots the deer aren't relying on it. They don't need it to, live. We've got plenty of native vegetation for them to browse on and woodies browse over the winter. This is more kind of a public use management side of it. More, it'll be utilized by our managed deer hunters on our archery hunts and rifle hunts. But in this, we planted kind of a variety of stuff rather than a monoculture. There's some wheat, some cereal rye, turnips, radishes, rape, 3 different kinds of annual clovers. And what we're trying to do is just have the green browse through the winter. A lot of it kind of winter kills. And then the 3 different annual clovers should start coming on in the spring. They'll kind of have a rosette this winter that the deer will browse. And then in the spring, they'll come on one at a time early, probably starting in like March, April. One will start really putting on some growth and going to seed. And then you'll have that stage up until about June. And what we're looking to do is probably no-till like soybeans or a different crop in here. And then them clovers allow the deer to have something to browse on without damaging the actual crop. And then once them clovers run their annual cycle come June, the beans should like canopy up over the residual residue. And that should help blanket the soil to keep weeds from coming up, so it's less herbicide that you use, as well as break down and add nutrients into the soil. So again, there's an objective at it. It's not just coming in here and disking up the soil and throwing something in it. In order to kind of justify it, you have to have a reason for doing it, a reason for the wildlife, a reason for the soil. Kind of the way I like to look at it. All right, so here we are at kind of a savanna restoration area. In the background here, you can see a large indicative savanna tree, a very large, wide, sprawling canopy. And then there's another one behind it, some other ones in there more. But if you look behind us here, this is kind of on the edge of what we call like a disturbed remnant prairie. It's had minimal disturbance since before becoming the conservation area. I'm sure it's had a disc through, once or twice, but not a whole lot of soil disturbance. disturbance. There's still some characteristics of an undisturbed prairie. So it's kind of in an area, we're up on top of a ridge where, you know, pre-settlement, then fires would have clashed into the edge of this woodland, killing out a lot of the trees. You can see right here, a lot of the forbs are coming back, and then if you look kind of through here, you'll see skeletons of a bunch of trees all through here. Probably before we came in here this winter, none of that little blue stem and other grasses, that probably wasn't in there, just because the ground was completely shaded. And we haven't got it burned yet, but we'll probably be trying to burn it maybe this dormant season. We've let the down trees kind of set for a little bit so they'll burn up and be consumed by fire. So to really open this edge up, allow the forbs and grasses to get underneath these large trees that, you know, would have had forbs and grasses under it before. And a lot of the trees we cut were like shingle oaks. They were really dense together, kind of dog hair thick, to where, you know, they weren't providing much of a mass crop. As far as acorns, they weren't going to provide any timber value. So when we came through, we left some of these nicer white oaks. They'll produce more of an acorn, and eventually, you know, they'll be, if this gets burned underneath, you know, once that tree reaches, you know, maturity and dies off, some of these other ones will be the next ones out here that'll grow large and sprawling on the edge of this. This is something we did in the winter. You can imagine trying to come through here in the summer and try to cut the base of a tree off with all this. We actually did this with some snow on the ground. Makes it a little easier to get in here and do work. Kind of just something with our jobs that varies throughout the year. We'll do a lot of our work in the timber. We've actually walked around today and are covered in seed ticks right now and stick tights, just little annoyances. So throughout the summer, we'll do more of our grassland work. We'll treat Sericea lespedeza and other invasives, usually either by like backpack spraying in our more highly diverse areas, or we'll get on a four-wheeler with a sprayer. So we kind of transition throughout the year. I talked about our fall covey counts. This is actually one of the areas with some of the higher quail populations. I actually have a point up on top of the hill here that I count, and I'll hear 6, 7, 8 coveys out here. It's just kind of a diverse area, again, you know, with the term diversity, because we have these edges. This kind of be like edge feather too. Some of the less prominent areas will edge feather, and that creates a softer edge from this field. Before these trees were dropped, this field would have hit these thick trees and created a hard edge. Now that these trees are dropped, you've got more of a transition. One to like the savanna right here, and then back into the woodland itself. So that's something we'll do kind of in the fall too. We'll create some edge feather, and it goes all the way around here. And then there's some larger oak trees down there as well. And then we do our fall covey counts up here in October. We've got another like green browse plot for deer right over the hill here. We've got some of our agricultural units out here as well, kind of allowing for an annual disturbance to get annual weeds once them fields go fallow. So kind of something interesting with our job. It's always something different throughout the year, and we kind of vary with, you know, we talked about growing season burns. We do some of that in here. This was growing season burn last summer, and then, you know, into the dormant season we'll burn from December, January, February. So we're definitely changing up our management tactics throughout the year based upon, you know, timing of different treatments, or, you know, just little annoyances that keep you out of the field. All right, so here we are on one of our other commercially harvested unit. It was thinned, I believe, back in like 2011, before my time here. But it's thinned similar to that first one we looked at, and you'll remember back in the video, all the native forbs and flowers and grasses through there. This would have the potential of being that. I mean, it's a pretty open canopy. It's a higher basal area than 30. I'd say it's probably 40 to 50. But still a canopy probably around the 50% area. But as you can see, it's really getting grown up with saplings. There's probably even some trees in there, kind of a mid-story tree that's probably, you know, too big around to kill effectively with fire, so it might need some mechanical treatment, chainsaw, chemical, depending on the tree. But this is an area that we're hoping to burn probably this spring. So it'd be a dormant season burn. So we'd probably top kill a lot of this off. So there'd be some like the aromatic fragrant sumac and stuff would probably be killed, but a lot of the other saplings, there's some red buds and stuff in there, would be top killed. But all that would mean, you get that fresh growth. It would allow for some forbs and grasses to kind of get up before probably some of them saplings would later on in the growing season. So there's some opportunity there to kind of get it back to that level. But as I said earlier, this is kind of, a 2 to 3 year restoration phase between burning cycles. This has been, I think it was last burned in 2016. So here we are 4 years. If we let it go 5 years, the trees get even taller, bigger around, harder to kill, to where eventually you're kind of getting, kind of a mid-story dominated woodland here. So our objective this coming burn season will be to get a fire through here. Top kill, you'll kill some of it, top kill a lot of it, and kind of start the stage of succession over again. And then, if we get it to where things align and we can burn every 2 to 3 years and get it back towards that first one looked, we might hold off. Once that's kind of established, we can hold off on a 5-6 year rotation after that. But it still offers great wildlife habitat. You think about it, you're a deer walking through there, nothing's going to hardly see you. If you're a turkey walking through here, it's going to be hard for an avian predator to swoop down and get one of your poults. There is a quail point right up here. We don't really hear too many quail in this area. It's kind of too thick and shrubby for quail to really get in here, but it still offers, great wildlife habitat one way or the other. Great bedding, plenty of browse, woody browse in the winter. So it's still offering something.